Okay. This is Voices in the Dark. I'm Jon.
I'm Dre.
And we have a special guest today as part of our Sex and Relationship series, Dr. David Stuart from the 56 Dean Street Clinic, which is kind of famous, it turns out, and very fancy. Thank you for joining us today on the topic of chemsex, which is something that we wanted to do an episode about because we sort of knew the word, we had a number of suspicions about what it would be, and then we watched a bit of documentary stuff about it, and we were like, we've no idea what we're talking about. We need to speak to someone who does. So first, welcome, and then how would you describe what this thing called chemsex is?
Well, thanks for the welcome. I'm not a doctor, firstly.
Oh, whoops.
I'm just a mister, but proudly a mister. What is chemsex? It's actually it was about 2001 when I was doing a lot of chems myself. I think chems were just a word that was being thrown around on gaydar and on our texts before we really got fully into online stuff. Because we're always scared with new technology that the police will watch everything we say, and if we used the words like meth in a text, someone would come and arrest us immediately. So just chems are just one of those words that came around. But I was identifying something, a kind of drug use phenomenon that didn't look like any of the drug use trends that I'd ever seen before, that I was familiar with, or the stereotypes like street homelessness, crime, heroin use, or like black American crack cocaine use. I was identifying something very different, and I felt it needed a word, and it was chemsex. And what it means to me, as I was defining it then, was a phenomenon, a syndemic of different things, mostly driven by online hookup culture, some uniquely gay cultural things were happening to do with drugs. One was languages and tribes and things that were going on within online hookup culture. Rejections, racial rejections, masculinity camp rejections, or inclusions. And the phenomenal availability of new drugs. And as an epidemiologist, watching how quickly these three new drugs, crystal methamphetamine, methadone, and GHB or GBL, kind of overtook the traditional ecstasy and cocaine that gay men had been using. It was so fast and so widespread because of the use of those sex apps that it was creating a whole new kind of problem. A whole new set of joys, but a whole new set of problems as well. And it was redefining a lot of the way young people experience sex for the first time, young people experience the way they communicate and need sex, but also the way older people were experiencing sex too, having come out of 30 plus years of an AIDS epidemic and HIV defining a lot of the sex we have. So I was trying to find a word, chemsex, that described the syndemic of all of those things happening.
So you think that the spread and pervasiveness of these new drugs was primarily due to the sort of app hookup culture allowing sort of the, I guess, notoriety in their use to spread quicker than they would have in the past?
I would. Let me put it like this. The way drug problems develop, and I'll kind of use stereotypes if I may. Let's say my younger sister was going to come to London, and if I, as an epidemiologist, was going to sort of track the journey of a person developing a drug problem, she would have to get off the plane, hopefully give me a call and say hello, find somewhere to live and find a job, develop a real network of friends. Someone within that network might introduce her to a drug. She might try the drug. Now, whether she likes it or not depends on her background. She had the same childhood as me, so she's probably going to like the drug. It would be a drug that would be typical for her population.
Okay.
And she might be offered it. It might be offered to her again a month later, and again a third time a month later that, and maybe a month later she'll be introduced to a drug dealer. And that's how a problem might start to develop. In a big city like London, it could happen in quite a short amount of time. Just a few months. But if my younger gay brother was to get off the plane and come to London, he would be on Grindr before he hit the tarmac, and he would be offered chems the same day without even having to pay, in the most sexy environment of all. And whether that would be a joyous, harmless experience for him, or whether that would be a problematic experience, depends on a whole lot of factors, like his own inhibitions around sex. And we've never seen in the history of the world a population of people introduced so quickly to potentially harmful drugs as gay men have via those apps. So yeah.
Wow.
Something that I didn't expect when we were just going, okay, so what is chemsex, is that it seems to be primarily, but is it only a thing going on for gay men? I mean, do you know beyond that?
Well, as the guy that kind of defined the word and made up the word in the first place for a particular purpose, I was trying to describe, that unique set of syndemics things. So for me, it's about gay hookup culture. Heterosexual people might use chems, like crystal meth, and they might even use it for sex, but it wouldn't be wrapped up with the concepts of internalized homophobia, shame around HIV, online HIV zero-sorting concepts, rejections of masculinity or femininity, and all those kinds of things. So a heterosexual person might use chems in a sexual context, but that's a heterosexual person using chems in a sexual context, and it's not chemsex.
Okay, I didn't realize the word was defined to describe this particular population and these issues as well.
Yeah.
Huh. And is there something, let's try and unpack some of the bits about internalized homophobia, for example. What role is that playing in these activities?
It plays a role, certainly, I think. And I mean, I think I don't want to launch into this by sort of saying everyone that uses drugs has a problem with it. A lot of us use drugs, and it's just a great disinhibition that feels good, and it doesn't always lead to harm or harms that we can't manage. But there are certainly, sex can be complicated for a lot of gay men. It's 2018. Internalized homophobia, it's kind of hard to describe, isn't it? But imagine that if you're I'll tell you my own story, okay? So imagine that if I've got like 9 sisters or something. I can't even count them anymore. I've got a lot of sisters. But if I was going to go home to my imaginary, I'm going to use my imaginary family if you don't mind. If I was going to go home to my imaginary family, they know I'm gay, they're cool about it, they know I'm an activist, and I'm very welcome at the dinner table. I'm very welcome around the Christmas tree, singing carols at Christmas when I go home with my boyfriend, with my husband. And they want him there and he's welcome, and they make it very clear. But as my sisters put their arm around their husbands and kiss their husband on the cheek as we're singing Christmas carols, I feel weird doing that with my guy. It just feels kind of weird. And that's not my parents' fault. It's not my family's fault. It's internalized homophobia that makes me feel weird. And that can manifest in the bedroom too. Sometimes I might just want to put my legs in the air and get fucked and have a great time. But I grew up hating my own femininity. I got beaten up for it at school. My sisters even teased me about it. It made my parents worry what was wrong with me. I hated my own expressions of femininity so much for so many years, so profoundly, that doing something which was perceived by me to be the feminine role in bed, putting my legs in the air and getting fucked, was really, really hard. I actually needed drugs to actually enjoy it. Otherwise, there was all this other stuff going on in my head. Like, I just, like be masculine, be more masculine. How can I be? I should be on top. Well, listen, it's kind of nonsense. I should be able to just lie back and enjoy it. And I'm sorry I needed drugs to do it.
It's not nonsense. It is nonsense and it isn't nonsense. It's something that I thought about in terms of like mental health more generally, that a lot of things, like what you were describing was a defense mechanism that you came up with probably largely unconsciously to look after yourself, to try and not be hurt by other people. And then it's really hard later in life to turn off the defense mechanism, to just go, it's okay, I can look after myself now, or I can be this thing that I was scared of expressing before. And I think that's, for me, a lot of issues to do with depression come from that it helped me in some sense to keep me safe, to go, well, I'm going to bully myself so much more than you ever could. So you can't really hurt me because only I can hurt me. But guess what? That doesn't really work out as a long-term strategy, but it's really hard to stop. It's like it's become almost hardwired.
We are amazingly resourceful people at the way we can manage shame, overcome problems, deal with our own problems, and cope. I think coping is a phenomenal thing that we're really, really capable of in lots of different ways, but sometimes those coping strategies we create don't work out for us, as you say.
No, in the documentary, the thing that just floored me was the HIV dissident, did he call himself? And was that the first time you'd ever come across it? Because it felt like someone that just was in complete denial?
In a work setting, yes. Yeah. It was the first time I'd come across it at work, but it wasn't something I'd unheard of. I live in an HIV world, and I see stuff online. In fact, I get emails from some strange, weird organisation that I'm scared to what's the word when you stop receiving them? Unsubscribe, because I think if I click on that, something dreadful will happen. But they're telling me that HIV is a myth, and there's special medicines, herbal medicines that can make it all go away, and I should stop investing in this pharma conspiracy. It's
wow.
What? Wow, what? Do you not get those emails?
So no, not those ones.
But yes, when Simon told that to me, I watched the film a lot. I think I was a bit surprised. Because also it has quite a lot of consequences in his situation. He was having a lot of condomless sex with other people, and he was infectious. So I mean, as part of my job is to support people to be safer and to support the general community at large. And I really, really, really wanted to help him. So I think I did. You could see I was a bit shocked that day.
But is that part of also a shame thing? Do you think it's a coping mechanism to say, well, it's not actually a real thing anyway?
A coping mechanism for him.
For him or people who have that opinion?
I think my response to it is HIV is... Wouldn't it be nice if everyone who got diagnosed with HIV, on the very minute they're told, could just process it, accept perhaps the responsibility of it's because I didn't protect myself in that situation, forgive myself for not having done that, don't blame myself or another person, and just process it and be at peace with it. But that's not how it works, you know. Everyone has weird, complex reactions to it. It's so associated with stigma. It has consequences. For a lot of people, the first thing our mums and dads say to us when we say we're gay is, "Oh, that's okay, but you'll just catch AIDS now," or something like that.
Wow.
And it's a confirmation that our mums and dads were right when we catch it. It's hugely consequential in so many different ways. And so when someone like Simon has a reaction like that, I absolutely get it. I've had my own complex reaction that took a decade to process or more. So I completely understand, and it was a pleasure to help Simon through that.
It's I guess a little detour away from chemsex and into the question of HIV. There seems like, or maybe it's not a detour, a lot of what seemed to be a theme in that documentary was, in the chemsex world, who cares if you've got HIV, because probably all of us do, and there's a sort of abandonment. And that's sort of an attitude that has surprised me just through what I see these days, flicking through Grindr, people who just want unprotected sex. And to me, I'm like, well, no. Like, I don't know who you are. And if this is your attitude talking to me, saying you want unprotected sex, it's just 100% indication that you're probably not the safest candidate for me to have unprotected sex with. And I wonder how much attitudes are now just getting so much more blasé about HIV and infection. Because I know that, and I feel bad about my own reaction in this. If I look on a profile and see somebody says they're HIV positive, I'm like, and part of me's going, okay, don't be prejudiced. Obviously, this is their situation. They're being open about it, which is much better than not. And if they're taking their treatment, it's actually statistically safer, I believe, than if it's somebody who simply doesn't know their status. Awesome. But I'm still like, oh, I'm a bit scared. Whereas the world around me, it feels like, it's like, who cares anymore? It's all fine. What is going on there? Am I seeing those trends? Is that just my perspective, or? No,
you sound like the voice of lots and lots and lots of people out there. I mean, it's a complex world we're negotiating, isn't it? Someone like me, I've been positive for, 27 years or something. I actually have lost count of that too. I live a long way from my family, and to many members of my family, I'm still the sick uncle in England. There's nothing sick about me, and for those of you that are listening, I'm a hot mess here. I'm looking great. There's nothing sick about me, and I don't like my nieces and nephews who I love, but I don't get to see them as often as I do. But their concept of me is the sick uncle in England, because of stigma of HIV. I have HIV, but I'm not sick. And I don't want that to be the main thing they associate with me. There are a whole lot of other brilliant things about me that I want my nieces and nephews to know. So I can be angry about that. It's okay for me to be angry at the stigma that caused that. I've been rejected by people who are frightened of my HIV, and I really liked them. And I understand that too. But if I don't understand it, that's okay too. I'm allowed to be upset by that. And it's just it's really complex, HIV. It triggers fears, it triggers stigma, shame around sex, religious consequences. It was about death for a long time. A lot of people in my generation are still traumatized by the deaths that happened so en masse and feel guilty for being alive even, for having survived those days. It's way complex. Whatever reaction that you have when you're on Grindr and you see these things, just breathe and give yourself permission to have that reaction. It's cool. And remember, you can talk to your community about it. That's what I'd like it to be, a community, as opposed to blocking someone because they're HIV on Grindr, which I know you wouldn't do.
Do you think that, because it sort of feels like unprotected sex was bad for only one generation before it was fine, like who cares again? And I don't understand the transition. Is it because it's no longer a death sentence, and so young people haven't seen their peers die around them, that suddenly it's easier to pretend like it's not there or it's not a problem?
The ability to pretend it's not there is, everybody's capable of that, all generations. Okay. I can pretend it's not there a lot. And we're using the word protected and unprotected sex, which meant something for a long time, but it means different things in different contexts too. So, of course, now that we have PrEP, having sex without a condom while someone's on PrEP is protected from HIV, but perhaps not protected from other things too. So that word is kind of changing meaning, as many of the words we use in this arena sort of do. If I'm having condom sex with you, but you're going to hurt me emotionally, I call that unprotected sex. I'd like to protect myself by getting to know you first and trusting that the person I'm having sex with is someone that I choose to trust, to be intimate with and naked with, and to take that journey with. So I mean, it is a weird kind of word, but generationally, people experience it differently. There's even the way chemsex is perceived. There's a lot of people my generation, I'm 52, who remember the 80s and remember the newspaper headlines about AIDS and promiscuous, disgusting gay men having filthy sex, spreading disease and all that kind of stuff. And there was not so much me, because I was just getting high at the time, but a lot of my generation were fighting to define gay sexual liberation in the middle of an epidemic, trying to say, they were trying to shut the saunas down in America, or the bathhouses, and some great heroes were saying, no, AIDS is not about saunas, it's not about lots of sex. A person who has sex with 10 people a week can protect themselves from catching it in every single circumstance if they care about themselves and are well informed and know about it. It's not about how many people you have sex with, or it's not about where you have it, in a sauna or in a bedroom. They were fighting for gay sex and gay sexual liberation to not be destroyed by the AIDS epidemic. And so for that generation too, talking about chemsex is horrible, because chemsex is kind of suggesting that there might be something wrong with concepts of gay sex within gay communities. And it might challenge that concept of gay sexual liberation, or certainly bring it into question. I don't know what gay sexual liberation is, but I think the right to have sex, I think a lot of people very angrily and defiantly during an AIDS epidemic defined it as the right to have sex with as many people as you want, as often as you want, wherever you like, without any shame or stigma or judgment. And I wouldn't argue with that too much. I'd just add a bit on the end that it's okay to have sex with as many people as you want, as often as you want, wherever you like, without shame or stigma or judgment, provided it's coming from a place of self-worth, caring for yourself, the person you're with, in your community at large. And some of that bit was missing from the earlier definitions. And the fact that it was missing then means it's hard for some people to fathom the questions being raised by chemsex now. Because while a lot of people are using chems in safe and brilliant ways and in caring ways, a larger group of people are using it in kind of acting out ways and some self-harming ways. So it does bring that topic back, and it's an uncomfortable topic for a lot of us.
Do you feel that there's a distinction? I guess there is a distinction, but how different is chemsex from other drug addiction problems? Because we've got the sex element in here too, but is it kind of the same underlying dynamic?
It's complicated. Sometimes sex is complicated. It depends what we're medicating, if that's what we're doing. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, there are certain kinds of people that can have sex and feel entitled to whatever they're putting their penis into, feeling entitled to be on top of this, and they're not thinking, does my bum look big in this, and, you know, what are they thinking of me? Some people can do that, and a lot of us can't. A lot of us are thinking, and it depends what we're medicating, if that's what we're using chems for. I'm answering your question really badly. I think Chemsex's particular definition is that there is a syndemic of cultural factors about gay sex to do with the AIDS epidemic, to do with the way we perceive AIDS and fear it, or zero-sort it, or fathom it in our sex lives, the rejections we've had because of HIV, the rejections imagine going to bed with somebody as an HIV negative person. I'll tell you another one of my stories. When I was many years ago, because I don't have sex anymore, but many years ago I was in bed with someone and he was HIV negative, and he'd asked me and I said I was positive. I didn't really know what undetectable meant then. I was undetectable, but I didn't know it.
And so people do know what it means.
Undetectable means I have an undetectable viral load, which means the medicine that I take for my HIV means that I can't infect anyone else. My viral load is too low to infect anyone else, even if I came inside them without a condom. It just can't happen. And that's been the case, in my case, for more than 15 years. But my doctors didn't explain it to me that way. They just explained that I had a low viral load. So in this certain situation, somebody was in bed with me and I explained that I was HIV positive. We were using condoms. Everything was safe. But he kept asking me, is this safe? Is this safe? Is this safe? Yeah. And as we were having sex and he was looking in my eyes, I could see in his eyes fear. And I couldn't tell in that moment, is it really fear, or is it me transferring my own judgment or perceptions of him being fearful of it? And then the following days, I just kept in these texts, but do you remember when we did that? Was that safe? And it just went on and on and on. It was actually traumatizing. I deal with it better now, but I was younger then. Those texts were kind of really traumatizing. We have lots of things that when you do chems, those issues go away. That's just one example of something that can be complicated in the bedroom. Another example, I ask a lot of guys if they have sober sex, because I talk about sex a lot. And a lot of guys go, yeah, I can have sober sex, and I don't have a problem with chems, and la la la, and I'm really pleased to hear that. And I ask them about the sober sex, and I ask them if they can lie back and, let's say, get a blowjob. And I hope that when they're doing that, their mind can just go clear, they can feel entitled to this, enjoy the sensations of a wet mouth on a penis and just enjoy getting a blowjob. Clear head, feeling entitled, physical sensations, enjoyment. Or is there this kind of machinery going off in their head like clockwork, this tick-tock of what do I do in reciprocation? How long do I stay in this position for? Can he see how ugly I really think I am, or is he buying this image that I'm performing for him? Oh my God, his finger's slipping down to my ass, I hope I'm douched. Is my dick still hard? Who will be top? Who will be bottom? What do I do in reciprocation? And if everything goes okay during this tick-tock, if 2 erections maintain, and if 2 orgasms happen within reasonable time difference from each other, something else you'd have to kind of tick-tock figure out, and they're lying together after the sex in each other's arms and everything's okay and there was no rejection, then they come to me and say, see, I had good sober sex. And I'm like, what? What planet, what earth, what world have you lived in that the definition of good sex is a performance that manages to avoid any rejection? But a lot of the guys that I talk to sort of do kind of struggle with the inhibitions, the disinhibition that we deserve to feel when we're having sex. I want to put my legs in the air and just enjoy it. I want to be camp in bed and find that sexy. I want to enjoy my camp lovers in bed and find that sexy. I want to not think about HIV when I'm in bed with people, though sometimes I do. Sometimes I want to think about HIV when I'm in bed with someone. That might factor into my fantasies too. All fantasies are valid, and I want to be able to communicate them and not be ashamed of them. I want to be able to be loving and connected and disinhibited in bed, and it can be really bloody hard. And for a lot of gay men, and it does fathom differently for gay men. I'm not saying better or worse, but a heterosexual person has lots of problems in bed too. But the chemsex definition I've got is about those gay cultural ones that are unique to us, the things that made you two smile at me as you identified with some of those things I was talking about.
And so, do the chems then prevent those things? Like,
yes.
They just turn that off and you're in the moment and you're doing that?
Yes. Okay, so different drugs do different purposes. I think if you and me were having sex on heroin, we wouldn't be having sex. I'm
No.
sorry. I'd be numbed out with my eyes closed, feeling safe and warm, because that's the purpose that drug serves, and it's designed to serve that purpose really well.
Yeah.
So we're not going to be having sex, I'm sorry, on heroin. John, if you and I were having sex on ecstasy, we're going to kiss a lot. The sensation of your skin under my fingertips is going to be overwhelming. I'll really care about you, and I'll be really interested in your whole life story, and you'll be interested in mine. It'll be such an amazing connection. We'll have extraordinary sex as well. It'll be very empathic, because this is an empathizing drug, which heroin isn't. And I would say if heroin is a dissociative in a kind of way, ecstasy is an empathizer, and that's a beautiful thing for sex. And that'll be a really, really nice experience.
But no one's going to come.
Right. If that's a goal. It might not be the goal.
No, just till you get tired.
But that doesn't translate to chemsex, because that's two people having loving, connected, intimate sex. Chemsex, that's not a chem. So if we were going to have sex on crystal meth, boom, 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 my dopamine levels are hitting the roof like no other drug on the planet can do. I am insatiable, so I'm not feeling empathy. I don't really care about your life story. I'm sorry, John, I really, really don't right now. I'm interested in that and this and how this feels. And Dre, I don't really care about your life story either, or I'm not really care about kissing you. I mean, kissing is fucking awesome, but it's not because I'm kissing you. It's just because it feels amazing, and I need more satisfaction, because that's what the dopamine is doing for me. And after an hour of this insatiableness and franticness, I need more. So let's get another person around, or get more drugs, more Viagra or something, or change the porn, because what we've been watching just it isn't working for me anymore. My dopamine requires greater stimulation. I need more, and that can go on for 3 or 4 days. And that's chemsex. And yeah, the drugs have changed, and we've chosen or found drugs that we needed in our bedrooms, which ecstasy wasn't providing for us.
That's what's really fascinating here. That do you know of the work of Gabor Mate?
No.
He's a Canadian or like Hungarian background doctor who is now focusing on like addiction and mechanisms of addiction. And one of the things he emphasizes is that the drug is not the problem. The drug is an attempt to solve a problem.
Yes.
And we miss the point entirely by just focusing on the chemicals. It's like, well, how do you feel when you take this drug? Okay. And what unmet need does that address for you? And until we can look at the needs that are failing to be addressed in your everyday life, otherwise, the problem is not going to be solved. And this seems so controversial to a lot of people, but it makes so much sense.
Is that controversial?
I think it is probably. I mean, in terms of if we just go and do a little poll on the street outside and we ask about drugs and drug addiction, I think most people would think, well, you know, if I took some cocaine now, I wouldn't want to do that because I might become addicted.
Yeah. Yeah, we misunderstand drugs so much. The whole world does. Chemsex is not a problem. Chemsex is a symptom of another problem that exists within gay culture. And the reason that is so controversial is because a lot of us don't want to talk about that problem. It's easier to say drugs are the problem. There's nothing wrong with us. Nothing wrong with our community. Nothing wrong with sex we have. We fought for this gay sexual liberation. Don't say there's anything wrong with it. Don't you dare. Chemsex it's a drug problem, and that's all. No. You know, chemsex is just a symptom. We're trying to medicate something we're finding difficult to manage in our bedrooms or in our intimate lives or in our sexiness in gay sex. And so, what was his name?
Gabor Mate.
Yeah. I think it's obvious to all of us, at least. It's just.
How would you summarize that problem that it's been trying to be solved by chemsex? What the shortest kind of way of saying what is it?
Okay. The problem we're trying to solve is that gay men have had it hard for about 50 years. Gay men have had it hard for a lot longer than that. But let's just stick with 50 years. Gay sexual liberation. Sorry, no. Let's just say sexual liberation of the 60s, flower power, and all that amazing time. That was great for gays. And I even remember towards the late 80s, early mid-80s, no, it was earlier than that, Mick Jagger and David Bowie professing to be bisexual, because at the time it was almost cool and fluid and awesome, but then AIDS happened. Suddenly, Mick Jagger and David Bowie went back into the closet. I think they were just making it up for laughs, but actually they went right back into the closet, and gay sex took a backward turn and became horrible and stigmatized and yuck again. And HIV impacted gay men's sex lives. There were deaths, there was trauma. And then technology came along. So I know you wanted the short answer. I can't do it.
That's all right. But
Okay. The technology came along, and if I'm going to meet you two in a bar, I'm speaking English to you now, yes?
Yes.
But it's not my first language. My first language, like many mammals, when I came out of my mother's womb, I was vulnerable to prey and to the elements. I needed feeding. I was very vulnerable. I was very unsafe. But I had a primal need to be safe. It's my primary need is to be safe. Remember that. And the only way I knew I was safe, the first language I learned, was looking up into my mother's face and the expressions on her face. And that's what told me I was safe. It was the first language I learned. And it's a language I use a lot. I'm looking at your faces now, and they're telling me so much. They're telling me that I'm safe to make myself vulnerable with you today with these conversations. I couldn't do this online. And I need this language in sex. I need it in bed, I need it in intimacy, I need it in all elements of my life, but my God, I need it in the bedroom where I'm negotiating sex, which for me, at least, is one of the most intimate and vulnerable things I can do. And technology changed all of that. It meant I was committing to having sex with people before I'd even met them or looked in their faces. It meant that I was committing to having sex with people, and I was requiring to have an understanding of my sexual and emotional needs, given that 50 years we've just had, and the AIDS epidemic and all these other vulnerabilities about gay sex and shame and masculinity. I needed to understand my sexual and emotional needs, and I need to communicate them to you using an avatar, 140 characters, and a photoshopped image of my abs. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
And so we have chemsex. And some of the problems that we are medicating with chems are our concept of how we understand and enjoy sex and the role sex plays in our gay lives and our gay cultures and scenes. It does need a little bit of looking at. It's all fine, but it needs a little bit of looking at because it's harming a lot of us.
What it makes me wonder about, in terms of, I'm just thinking of my own experience, that I feel like that big chunk of history which continues to have its cultural resonances through to me, but it wasn't my history, not my personal experience. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed from the older gay friends I have that I've had it pretty fucking lucky being born in 1985. Mm-hmm. But I can imagine that so the availability, perhaps for like the specific reasons that you've just described, the availability of the chemsex scene is there, which means that when I bring potentially my own problems to the table of just not having great self-worth, not feeling very sexy, feeling like I would love to be more disinhibited, but I'm not, that's now there for me to use and take if I want it. So it's on the table. But what for me, I think, and I guess for plenty of guys, is I don't know how much I really have a sort of internal homophobia, or that it's a more sort of generic self-worth concern and fear of rejection that then can go into this chemsex world, which is available. Mm-hmm. I'm just suggesting that it's not solely about gayness or that history. Mm-hmm. Does that fit, or do you feel like that contradicts?
That's a good fit. Nothing is black and white and exact. Mm-hmm. Nothing at all. You talked about a history not being your history because you're of a certain age?
Yeah, I mean, not my personally experienced history. I'm not saying it's not influential. So,
if you can have a moment of justifiable, but a moment of fear when you see an HIV positive person on Grindr, you live in a time when HIV is not life-threatening, where it's fixable and protectable. Where does that feel cut? Maybe you have inherited some of the trauma from your generations.
Yeah, I wouldn't deny it. I didn't mean it to sound that way. I just mean, I think that there must still be some distinction between people who have had all their friends die around them versus those who simply know that that's what happened.
There's a lot of gay men who use drugs and chems and alcohol for reasons that aren't about internalized homophobia, shame around sex, HIV, stigma or fear. It's always complex. There's as many reasons for using drugs as there are fingerprints on the planet. It's always broad and varied, and that's what when I'm talking about chemsex, and I'm often asked to summarize it or confine it down to a certain number of elements. I do for the sake of academia. I do for the sake of trying to have a dialogue around a subject. But when you're sitting down with an individual person, it's always an assessment of that situation, and it's always very, very broad and always fascinating.
There's something that you said earlier that I kind of wanted to ask you about, but you can tell me if you don't want to talk about it. You said you no longer have sex.
Oh, you heard that, did you?
Yeah. Is that sort of a touchy subject, or
No.
could you tell us why?
Yeah. I had a lot of... I want to use the word disposable, but I don't want that to be misunderstood. I had a lot of disposable sex in my life. I mean, lots. So I was an escort when I was 18, 19. I was HIV positive at the time I was 20. I was a drug dealer, having a lot of chemsex. I'm 52, and I've had a lot of disposable sex. No disrespect to the people that I was having sex with. I don't mean they were disposable. I just mean I don't remember a lot of it. It didn't mean a lot. It doesn't need to for some people, but I want it to. In moving forward, I want the role sex plays in my life to be fucking brilliant, amazing, and I haven't been looking for that as of lately. So I'm sort of celibate, choosing not to have sex because I'm a little traumatized by the sex I've had. That is a sort of sensitive, but I don't fully understand it. But I don't enjoy sex at the moment. And I think I will with the right person who helps me overcome some of my issues, who helps me process some of the stuff that I've dealt with, the role sex has played in my life and the damage it's done to me and the unkindness I've done to others. I've been an HIV positive infectious man having sex on drugs with lots of people in saunas. I don't know the consequences of that. I'm frightened of the consequences of that and what they mean. I've done drugs with people who can't handle drugs. I've given drugs to people who perhaps should never have been introduced to them. I've got a lot of stuff in my past that I have to take responsibility for, process, and I just know that when sex comes back into my life again, it's going to mean a whole lot, something very, very different.
It just feels like a string connected to so many other threads. If you pull on it, it's okay. But it's a very interesting and touching, and I hope you find that again, because it sounds like it's not like you've running away from it. It's more of it's not right for me right now. I'm hoping it will be at some point.
I think it's a nice way of summarising. I can't pretend that I'm sorted and I understand it, and I just I want sex to be good in my life. There's proper trauma, and I don't think it's alien to other people. My traumatic experiences. I think sometimes we don't identify it as trauma. Imagine a typical chemsex situation. Okay, hour one. My God, you're having the best sex of your life. I just feel good. Okay, actually, it's more about feeling good than having good sex. I feel sexy. And I'm in this sexy environment and I feel entitled to be here. That's what chems gives us more than great sex. And hour 7, I'm still having the best sex of my life, but I nicked someone's drugs because I ran out. I hope they don't notice. And hour 7, someone nicked my drugs. And hour 9, I was really high, and I think someone had. I'm not sure if I was consenting to their sex. I don't want to think about that. And hour 19, I was having sex with someone. They were rolling their eyes a bit. Maybe they were a bit high too. And hour 9. I was really fucking rude to that person online. I think I might have even been a bit racist or something. My God, I'm not going to think about that either. I'm so high. I need to go on to the next thing. I'm running from something. I'm not sure what it is. By hour 27, I'm so psychotic that I'm even imagining things, and I think those people are being really cruel to me, and so I'm going to be cruel back, and they think I'm really weird, and I don't know what's going on anymore. And then it's Wednesday, and I'm sitting down trying to process all that happened in there. I know a lot of people I see. A lot of people come to 5016 Street and they're coming to say, hi, I was at a sauna for 3 days. I had the best time of my life. The drugs made me feel amazing. I was having sex with people who normally wouldn't look at me twice. I think I've got gonorrhea though. There's something coming out the end of my dick. Can you fix me, please? And the nurses are like, yes, of course. Let's test this. But they want to have a whole lot of other conversations too about, is this are you enjoying sex, and do you have good boundaries to recognise when you're uncomfortable with something, and do you have the communication skills to communicate that when you feel uncomfortable with something? Consent to sex. Did you mention that you were slightly lost consciousness for half an hour and people were in the sauna cubicle. But the guy's like, don't even go there, please. It's normal for us. Don't judge me with your heteronormative stuff. This is normal for us. I've been to saunas before. I've done chems before, and I'll be doing them again. So don't judge me, okay? I need to get. Wow. And the nurse is like, okay, yes, I'm sorry. And the next, she's got 50 other guys to come in. Maybe the second guy needs pep, and we need to know the infectiousness of the person that might have been involved in that possible transmission. So we might ask, is the person you had sex with, are they here supporting you, or can we get them on the phone to just check their status and things like this? Because I don't know who it was. It could have been one of 10 guys. I only know the Grindr profile name. Like, don't judge me with your promiscuity stuff. It's normal for me to have lots of sex. I'm cool with it. Don't judge me. And then it's like, yes, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Here's your pep, and on we go. I'm exaggerating quite a bit.
But it's still cascading these
None
factors.
of these guys are identifying anything wrong with their sex lives, but we are identifying a kind of poor sense of sexual well-being community-wide. Not community-wide, but we're experiencing where there is trauma in a lot of people's lives and they don't identify it as such. Some things have become normalized, and I think that we need to have a dialogue about what we do enjoy about sex, where the boundaries are to protect myself from harm and trauma, where the boundaries are to protect other people from harm and trauma. And some of that dialogue isn't happening. And things are changing so fast with technology and hookup culture and the availability of drugs that conversation needs to be had louder. And that's why I'm here today, because it needs to be had louder and faster and busier to keep up with the trends. We're seeing a gay man die every month in London from G overdoses in the pursuit of sex and connection and longing. And we need to have this conversation. And there are a lot of people that don't want that conversation to be had. There's nothing wrong with gay sex. Don't shame us, and don't stop talking about chemsex. The straights will hate us all over again if you talk about it too much. But I do need to talk about it.
From the examples you gave, it sounds like the internalized protection mechanisms to, like, no, what I'm doing is fine. This is my sexuality, is kind of co-opted by the brain to justify unsafe or self-harming behavior. Like that protection of, I'm gay, this is who I am, don't judge me. Like, it's being reutilized by the brain for things that maybe, it's not about being gay. You just had sex with 20 strangers without protection. Like, that's not being gay, that's just doing things that are risky.
It might, if it is risky, then I would like to think that we can have sex with 20 strangers in a space of 4 hours that is respecting them and yourself and the community at large. And because you have to think that big when you're having that kind of sex, when we're in the middle of an epidemic, you have to think about your community and yourself. And a lot of the guys don't have those tools. Sometimes it's easier to just get high and not think about it. Just get high and not think about it, because they don't have the tools, and they don't have the tools because we're not giving to them, because we're not talking to them about it enough.
And so one of my questions about your clinic, because I was really interested in the concept of having a clinic that is both sexual health and a drug sort of clinic in the same place, because in this particular case it's a joint problem. So addressing them separately would just lead to not particularly useful clinical outcomes. But my question was going to be, is there also a psychological component to it? Because I wasn't sure if that was the case, but it does sound like you guys try to figure out why they're doing this and try to help them with it. So is there a sort of psychologists there, or
yes.
is it?
We have 56 Dean Street. The guys that created it in the first place, it's 2009, I think. Were into, I guess it was a bigger goal of HIV prevention and managing our HIV epidemics, which for a lot of people is just medicine and maybe making people understand safer sex practices. But it's actually the reason why a person doesn't care about themselves on Wednesday when they do on Thursday in different bedrooms. And understanding that is how you really can beat an epidemic, and understanding people's behaviour. In order to do that, you really have to invest in a community and behaviour. So 56 Street does have all of the medical stuff. We have testing and treating and vaccinations, but we've also got a psychosexual therapy team there. We've got Chemsex support, we've got sex worker support, we've got trans support, community support around those things. We've got the Dean Street Wellbeing Program, which you probably heard of the Rat Park experiment. I bet you have.
Oh, yes, I have.
So if I can summarise it, and correct me because I tell the story probably incorrectly, I'm sure you know it better, but a certain number of rats were put into individual cages and had the option of taking a drug. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it was heroin. Like they could have heroin in the water or just regular water.
And I think every one of the rats nearly got addicted to heroin, and that told the scientist something in particular. But another scientist thought, well, what about if we put another 100 rats in a community, a giant cage with wheels where they can form relationships and connections and have sex and interact with each other, and they have the same access to the same heroin in the water, and see which ones become, and a phenomenally low number of them became addicted, telling us that when people perhaps have better connections, better concepts of community connection, are satisfied with sex and connection and love and affirmations, they're less likely to have a problem with drugs. And so when I was invited to create the Chemsex clinics there, it was so exciting because I had so much freedom to really do it beautifully. It was more than just one-on-one Chemsex support. I had the freedom to create a Dean Street wellbeing program, which for me was the bigger cage. It was the community. I was aware of my gay scene. I know that there's a culture of gentrification and safe spaces being closed down, which is a current theme in gay communities at the moment, particularly in London. But I see that as more of an opportunity than a lot of the gay safe spaces. For me, growing up, were going to a gay bar and watching a drag queen lip sync to a 1970s song while I run around the bar getting drunk looking for sex. And no disrespect to drag culture, because I fucking love it, and getting drunk as well. But that was not a safe space for me. All I learned there was to connect sex with intoxication and bravado, kind of performance sex with picking up and hookup culture, as opposed to sort of really understanding my sexual and emotional needs and the other needs that I had which weren't met. There was a trade culture, the fabulous nightclub in London where we got high every weekend for 20 years. A lot of the talk about safe spaces being closed down by Starbucks and stuff like that, I just see a great opportunity to redesign our gay scenes. I went around London and found every drag queen, talking kind of metaphorically, but imagine talking to every drag queen in a city and saying, rather than just lip syncing to a song, how about if you recreate it and you have an audience? What about recreating that space, cabaret style, and using your stage and your microphone and your platform to engage your gay community in conversations about Grindr, about sex, about sexual assault, about chems, about rejections, mask shaming, or they have conversations, because I think we're really thirsty for those conversations, and we can create authentically safe spaces within our scenes, not just places to get drunk and watch performance, but actually where the performance is part of addressing and dialoguing the issues that we really, really, really need to. So I was very fortunate with the Dean Street Wellbeing Program to be able to create a lot of those kinds of authentically safe spaces so we can support our communities with these dialogues that need to be had.
Dialogue can be so tricky. And I'm definitely in favor. That's why we do a podcast, for one thing. And yet I have had experiences. My question is really about the way that we can improve the training of the people who are in the counselling and the STI testing world. That I remember, like, when I lived in Oxford, regularly go to the clinic there, and I had my little list because I was having a pretty promiscuous period at the time. And they're like, so who have you slept with? And I'm like, okay, these people, and they're from these countries. And I just remember very clearly when they said, so how many since last time? I'm like, 10. And they're like, and that hurt me. Okay, it's down to me as to whether I let that hurt me. But, I was like, I feel hurt. Now I judge you. Now I don't feel comfortable with you because you've clearly got your opinion of my behavior. And another time where I had I was sent to see the counseling on your way out person, because I had foolishly unprotected sex in Russia with a Russian guy who at the time I was being swept off my feet by. And they just point to the map and Russia is bright red. They're like, Russia is HIV. And I'm like, well, there's a problem with that map because Russia is very big and most of it's uninhabited, for one thing. For a second thing, I don't know what this is meant to achieve. You're just trying to make me scared. And I already know that I did something silly. But this conversation is not helping me in some ways. So do you get a sense that this is something outside of 5016 Street which is being taught sufficiently to the people who are doing the tests and providing the care?
Sufficiently, no. I know that attempts are being made. I mean, everyone gets it wrong. I even say the wrong thing a lot, and I try not to. I know that some of my colleagues do. I know that one of the events that my wellbeing program did a long time ago was some people went into the bedroom and had sex. And we waited outside with cameras. And when they came out of the bedroom, we interviewed them about the sex they just had. And there's a thing that therapists call the rosy glow, when you're still glowing with the rush of the connection you just had. They can't take their hands off each other, and grinning from ear to ear with the flush of the experience they've just had, of the connection and the intimacy and the sex. And we used those films to show them to two different audiences for different purposes. So one was for gay audience, so we can talk about intimacy and connection and the joys of sex, particularly in hookup culture, where sometimes the intimacy is lacking and it's just hookup after hookup. And we also showed it to healthcare professionals, which is coming back to answering your question, because a lot of health professionals, if you ask them, why did you catch gonorrhea, say because you had risky sex. And these films sort of show you they caught gonorrhea because they had amazing sex. And sometimes we need to be reminded of that, especially when healthcare workers are faced with the phenomenal epidemics in very large scales of people having risky sex over and over and over again. And they feel this burden to protect. And sometimes they can forget that people take risky sex because they were having a really good time, and they can forget to communicate that in the right way. And you mentioned that you might have foolishly had some unprotected sex in Russia. First thing I want to say is, I would say fabulously had unprotected sex, which might have had some consequences.
Maybe it's more that he dumped me quickly, and so I was like, oh, I'm sad. I'm sad about the sex now.
Hair loss. But yeah, so there is a whole lot of, there's always I travel the world actually visiting sexual health services and testing centres, and there are the checkpoints in Europe, which are usually staffed by gay men. They're usually gay men's testing services. And there's all kinds of stigmas that exist in the staff there too. But I think everyone's trying to get it right. But sex and gay sex is always going to be, not always, I hope not, but in our lifetimes, it's always going to be tied up with religion and judgment and moral judgments and stuff like that. And we always have to keep on trying to get it right. And remember that sex is, we'll always do our job better if we really understand the humanity of the foolish mistakes that we make in bed. I'm going to keep on making, I might not be having sex at the moment, but I reserve the right to have clumsy, foolish, mistaken, bareback, awesome, intimate, wet sex in the future. I hope that I will stay as I am now, caring about myself and the people with me and prioritising that. But I know that life can hand me a set of cards where it can affect my mental health. I cannot care about myself so much. I might not care about others. I might not continue to take HIV medicines on time. I might be careless in bed with other people about protecting myself and others. I hope that my community will support me in the fluidity of my well-being and nurture me back to a place of self-caring again. It's hard for us always, including people in healthcare settings, to get it right.
Especially if you're consistently confronted with people who are often in very difficult situations.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, there's a problem and we're trying to help you with it. It's very hard. It's a human instinct to be like, come on, just get it together, when it's the same thing over and over again. But that doesn't help.
You sort of have an academic mind, don't you? I think you...
Oh, dear. I've been busted.
It's a beautiful thing. Academic minds, you kind of walk the line very beautifully because you've got a very human mind as well. I know about some of the questions you've been asking today. But imagine those particular people who sit more on the academic side of things, and they are faced with a city full of HIV transmission, and they go to bed dreaming and thinking about how to beat this, and go to bed, and it's hard to think about the individual and their emotional state in the bedroom and what they're after the 300 rejections they've had. Think of the camp Asian guy who we love marching down the Pride March, and we adore him, but not in our grinder, please. That's not my opinion, of course. But that's kind of an experience that person might get. Camp isn't always welcome on Grindr. It's not always recognised as sexy by current masculine trends within gay culture, and they can receive some horrific rejections online. Not just 1 or 3 over a weekend, but imagine every weekend for 7 years, and then they make a choice in a bedroom with someone as a product of all of that trauma, and they're sitting in a healthcare setting and someone judges them for not using a condom, not fully understanding the complexity of the trauma of the last 7 years. So we do have a lot of work to do to train people, but it's a big job. And some people are academically minded, and they thank God for them, who they can work out how to mathematically end an epidemic in a city. And when you're thinking that big, it's hard to think back down to an individual again. So I hope that at 56 Dean Street and in other healthcare settings, we've got a good combination of people that can do the humanity and do the science and kind of mix it all together and end epidemics that way and improve sexual well-being for all people.
I feel I kind of want to drop a mic on your behalf at the end of that statement. I was also wanting to share a really positive experience I had at the one time I went to the 5016 clinic place without revealing too much personal information about somebody else. But I had an issue. I got an appointment, and the nurse that I spoke to was hilarious. And it was such a positive experience because, being very professional. And I was like, so basically you're saying the sex was just too rough. She's like, well, I'd say it's probably what the answer that's staring is in the face. And I was like, okay then. So what you're saying is this person basically needs to buy me a cake. She's like, I think you should bake the cake, actually. And we just started joking about it. And it was just, okay, well, this is a normal part of life. We're two human people making a connection. I was scared. Now I'm not scared. That's great. I can leave happy and well. And so much of that wasn't about them doing the test. It was the fact that there was a human interaction and I felt good at the end of it.
I'm pleased. It makes me proud of Dean Street as well. We have our core values are defined by PROUD, and it's an acronym for 5 different concepts, but it really is about putting people first and understanding the humanity of people. And there is a culture within Dean Street, certainly. I think it's because the two people at the top, so to speak, of Dean Street's inception, one is an HIV consultant with a brilliant medical academic mind of understanding really how to beat an epidemic in a city. I actually think he goes to bed dreaming of it. And another person is the clinic manager, who is a nurse and a therapist whose passion is for community. It's he that has really reached out to all of the communities and made them welcome at Dean Street and invited them to have a mutual understanding dialogue that goes on constantly. It's him that has fought for me to get a job there, even though I'm vastly underqualified. But he does champion. So that's that marriage of those two things, the humanities and the science and community, that I'm pleased you had a good experience there. Me
too. Could you, we've been talking for a while, but I would still like to know how you came to be in the position you are. And I clearly didn't my homework sufficiently and called you a doctor, because that you certainly seemed very doctorly and very...
These chains? Really?
Well, day off. How did it come about then? If you feel like you were vastly underqualified, how did it turn out this way?
Oh, geez, how did it work out this way? A lot of people have been kind to me. I've also been a fighter. So how did it work out this way? I was diagnosed HIV positive decades ago, before the medicines were invented. So I had a period of very poor health. I think you know about some of this from the movie. Like AIDS victim deathbed stuff for many years. Very traumatizing. And what I found when I got better, when the medicines were invented, was chems. I needed community, I needed connection, I needed inclusion, I needed a focus, I needed something to do, but I was out of work, traumatized, uneducated, and I didn't like myself, and I hadn't planned for a future because I thought I was going to die. I really felt like I had nothing, but I did need affirmation of my worth and a purpose. And I found chems faster than I found any other. And they gave me that. Certainly they gave me attention, affirmation, sexiness, inclusion in a sexy community. And it made me feel good. And And it got problematic for me. I enjoyed actually most of it. The reason I stopped doing drugs is not because I identified as an addict or it became really problematic for me. I had some bad days, I promise you. The reason I stopped is because I kind of had this realization that some of the people I was playing with I was damaging them. I think I was playing a role in a journey they were on towards chaos and harm. And I suddenly realized, after years of this, way too late, that I wasn't an island. I was impacting other people. And as resilient as I might be, others weren't. And that was the reason I stopped. And that's when I started to look at my community and what was happening. And before I sort of found this altruistic amazingness about me, I got arrested. And part of the journey after my arrest for drug dealing, because that was part of the cycle I was in of addiction, I guess. And after my arrest and sentencing, I was working in a drug service, a heroin service. And so I kind of there got a sort of understanding of the human work required around drug use and the complexity of it. And that's when I really started, I don't want to be working in this environment. I have a community that I've been part of, a problem with, contributing to. I need to do that. This Chemsex thing. I need that. Why aren't they coming to this heroin service? I don't get it. I got very angry and I became not knowingly, I got angry. I decided that on my own budget and in my own time, I was going to travel up and down the country to all drug services and teach those people that worked in heroin clinics about gay sex and about chems. I couldn't teach them. There was a culture there, and what's the word? They're ensconced in this culture of street homelessness, crime, addiction, heroin. It didn't look anything like what was happening to me or my community. And I couldn't teach them. And if I did find some people who really understood it, gay men weren't going there. And then I had this moment when I thought, oh, this is a sex problem, not a drug problem. Why would they go to an addiction service? I wouldn't have. They're going to go to heroic gay places where you talk about gay sex. If I want to help gay men who are engaged in chemsex, if they need help, if they wanted it, they're not going to go to an addiction service. Oh my God, they're going to go to places where they talk about gay sex. Oh my God, they're going to go to Dean Street. They're going to go to an LGBT drug and alcohol service, like London Friend or Antidote. Or they're going to go to 56 Dean Street. They're going to go to actually any sexual health clinic before they go to an addiction clinic. And so how I got into this job was just activism, being very loud, very, very loud, talking about it. And my first job was in 2011 after volunteering for many years, working for Antidote, London Friend, which is an LGBT drug and alcohol service. And shortly after that, I was invited by 5016 Street to start up those clinics there. And yeah, it was a challenge because drugs work is not traditionally done in a sexual health clinic. The tariff or the precedent within the NHS is you pay a drugs worker to work in a substance misuse setting. You don't pay a drugs worker to work in that kind of in a sexual health setting. So these were these challenges of, if I'm proud of anything in my own activism career, it's taking chemsex support out of traditional addiction services and putting them in places where we talk about gay sex really easily, as it does happen in 5016 Street. And then taking that model around the world.
So that, I guess that's the next step right now. You're sort of exporting this system, this idea around the world.
I wouldn't call it exporting because I feel like I'm being invited. There is a community of healthcare providers, a gay community as well, screaming out for better care. I'm in Taiwan next week. Every city has a uniquely different chemsex issue. It really, we were talking about this earlier. A city like Amsterdam, where drugs are very low stigma. There's not a lot of criminalization that happens with drugs. There's a cultural understanding that drugs are a part of our life and not a shameful arrest them quickly sort of thing. Also, gay sex is probably one of the least homophobic countries in the world. Or cities at least, Amsterdam, or even sex work. I mean, it's a celebrated part of the culture there. There's not a lot of shame to do with sex and drugs or gayness in Amsterdam. They do have their chemsex issues, but you see chemsex manifesting differently there than it would in an enormous, anonymous city like London, where life is a struggle, where everyone is a stranger, and where you need community in this mass of strangers, and some would argue a bit of cultural cruelty within the gay community, which I don't call cruelty, I just call coping. And then there's a place like Tel Aviv, which is quite odd because there is that bedrock of religion, obviously, and wherever there is religion, anywhere in the world, you'll find a degree of shame around gay sex, and that manifests as more drug use to cope with that. But also in Tel Aviv, there is a remarkable, a very high number of gay men have children within their partnered families, usually by in vitro fertilization. Quite a lot of twins, quite a lot. It's not unusual to see a couple, two gay men, pushing twin strollers down the boulevard in Tel Aviv, and for two grandmothers to stop and kiss the babies and ask the dads about what their morning was like. That so wouldn't happen in the street outside here. It wouldn't even happen in the centre of London. It happens rarely anywhere for grandmas to stop and kiss the babies of the gay dads. But it happens very commonly in Tel Aviv. So there is that. So chemsex manifests differently there too, because some of the guys who might be using chems in Tel Aviv are part of the circuit party culture. Maybe they didn't buy into that family unit, which is very much a part of the culture there. It's very family driven. And so the chems might be more problematic there too within a particular group of people who don't fit into the mould of socially acceptable gays.
Right.
Every city, and in Taiwan, of course, there is, and in parts of Asia, technology is more easy. If we were in Taiwan now, it would be quite okay for us to be having this conversation with our phones while we're doing something else on the phones. It's a very different kind of culture. And of course, chemsex has a lot to do with apps and technology and the way communication happens on technology and abbreviations and smileys and things like this. So chemsex manifests differently there too. So it is a joy to be invited to come and to these cities to learn how chemsex is manifesting there and help the support services there. But it's always about the same thing. It's about going to the HIV services first with the, I guess, academics or medically trained people who quite often say, I've seen it a little bit, but not too much, and I don't get it. And then I'll go to the gay charities where they'll say, it is happening here, but we've got it under control, thank you very much. And then you'll go to a screening of the chemsex documentary with 900 people in an auditorium, and 99% of the people put their hand up in response to a question, is chemsex something that you have to negotiate in your sex lives, whether it's you or your partners or your friends or stuff online? And so it's trying to then marry those three differing opinions within a city to get some right support.
I was just thinking of one of the small steps. You're making a lot of big steps, but here's just a small step that people could perhaps take, which is one of the things we sign off the podcast with, which is just be kind. Be kind to the people that if you're going to have a spontaneous sexual liaison with. I found it really important for me, and I can see how much it's appreciated. Just make sure the other person feels like you value them. Like, okay, maybe it's a brief thing, it's a one-off thing, but they're a person with their own history and their own life, and just taking the time to be kind and mark the moment that it was worth something and this meant something, even if it's just for now, that can change a lot for just one person. And part of me is like, oh, you think you can just help people? This sort of egotistical idea that I'll make sure it's all okay. Well, that's not what I mean. I just mean treat people with some respect. And then that, I think, is a domino that helps if the underlying cause is so much the sense of alienation and not having the value because other people don't treat you as though you do.
That's your mic drop moment. Yes, it can be summarised that simply. Kindness will solve chemsex. Kindness will solve all the problems within our communities. It is that simple. So be kinder on Grindr.
Tagline for
that's
this
the
show.
Be kinder on Grindr. That can be our subtitle or our hashtag going forwards. So do you want to drop our big sign-off questions?
Oh, you think? Okay. Yeah, sure.
The big questions.
So we started asking 2 questions to every guest we have on, and we think they're kind of very interesting and sometimes quite meaningful, but it's sort of the bigger picture type stuff. So the first question we sort of came up with because a friend of ours, sort of an international speaker and coach, has created this event called One Last Talk, where he gets people to give a speech as if that was the last time they're ever going to talk to anyone, like if they're going to die tomorrow. What will you talk about? What story will you tell to connect and to give a message to everybody else, seeing that you're leaving this world? So if you were going to give, if this was the last time you're going to speak, or if we had like an event and you were going to have to give a talk before that was the end of you, what would you talk about?
I don't want to shit all over it, but if it was my last moment, I wouldn't be in front of an audience. I remember a wank probably, actually. No, I mean, kindness.
Kindness.
It would always be about kindness within our communities. Be kinder to each other and we'll all be okay. Have fun.
Cool.
It would be that simple.
And the second question is something I thought of, which is, what if this was the last time anyone was ever going to talk? Humanity ends tomorrow. So we're recording this podcast, we're having this conversation, and we know that everything's going to end. But we feel like maybe 1 million years from now, an alien civilization will come down, and the first thing they find is this recording, and they're interested in the human race, they play it back. And this is your chance to kind of tell an outside perspective, what was it like to be a human being? What did it mean for you? What was important?
I can only speak of the experience of being a human being at this stage of evolution, at this time in history. We're trying to marry intelligence with primal urges, and it's an awkward time in our evolution for that. And we're messing it all up. So please come, take our planet and be nicer to it than we are, and have better sex than we're having.
Okay.
That's cool. I'm going to reflect on that. The two the dynamics that are at play there.
I can't do those final questions very well. I'm bad at those, but
we could have primed you. We could have primed you instead of dropping them. I just wonder what your answers would be. Thank you so much for coming, sharing so honestly and openly these things that are part of your story as well as a broader sociological situation. How can people find out more about the work you're doing, about Chemsex, and ways that maybe they can help themselves or the people around them?
I should give a website or something, but fuck that. Talk to each other. Talk to each other online, talk to each other in bedrooms. Be kinder, talk about sex, talk about our feelings, talk about our vulnerabilities, and prioritize how gorgeous and sexy our vulnerabilities are. Find out that way. Fuck their websites. Find out that way. Talk to each other.
Okay, no.com. Maybe .sex. Then thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. I've learned a lot today, and I hope that if people go and watch the Chemsex video, they do so with someone else, maybe hold their hand, because it's quite intense. Yeah. So until next time, everybody.
Am I signing off?
You're doing it.
Okay.
There you go.
Please be silly, be kind, and be weird.
Kaboom.